Round 10 of AFL action is done and dusted. It is locked away in the books, and it turned out to be a round that delivered some huge surprises. Join me today as we unpack all that action from another round of AFL football, get my votes in for the MVP award for 2026, and announce my team of the week. This is the round recap. On YouTube Universe, welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. Now, we have a little bit of housekeeping to get underway and out of the way before we dive into the round recapping of round 10. First and foremost, we didn't get a video out for round 9, so before we continue, on screen right now, I'm going to show you the votes from each and every game from that round, so feel free to pause and slow things down if you want to have a bit of a read and see who got those votes. But moving forward, I'm going to test a little bit of a different format in today's video. Instead of just rattling off stats, doing a brief chat, getting my votes in, and then doing team of the week, we're going to do it differently. We're going to structure things a little bit differently. We are going to talk about all the games, and considering the thumbnail of this series and even the title of this series is what did we learn from this particular round. So I'm going to try to pick 1 to 2 talking points specifically driven for each and every game from the round. Then at the end of the video, we will talk about all the votes from start to finish. Then I'll do my team of the week, and then we'll press on. Sound good? That's how we're doing it. So if you let me know in the comment section down below if you fly with this format a little bit better, because we're going to try things a little bit differently to shake things up. The round kicked off at the Gabba with Brisbane hosting Geelong, the grand final replay from 2025, and this had a lot going for it. This had a Brisbane outfit that started a little bit slow this year, but have finally found some form. This takes a Geelong outfit that had some players back in the team that didn't feature in the grand final last year, and they've been playing some really good football as well. So this was a clash of the Titans in many retrospects. I myself tipped Geelong in this game. I thought the tipping point was going to come to a head here. You have a look over the recent weeks and how both of these teams have played. Brisbane have been a bit of a slow start. They get into the game and they work their way in, and then they put their foot down after that halftime break and they convincingly run away with the game. But Geelong, for the most part, minus that 1 point loss to Hawthorn in the Easter Monday clash, have been playing some absolutely superb football, and I feel one of the biggest talking points out of this game is whether or not people are underrating Geelong and perhaps overrating Brisbane just a little bit, because it was Geelong by the way of 41 points. This was a game that from the first bounce looked to be convincingly in Geelong's favour, and even at points where Brisbane came back late in the second quarter to bring things back to an even keel, Geelong just put the foot down in that second half and absolutely destroyed them. At points, it looked like a training drill, just how easy Geelong was able to transition that football from back half to forward half by handball alone. There was one play in particular where I was just so dumbfounded by how easy and smooth Geelong transitioned the ball. I think it was a string of 4 to 5 handballs from deep defence that got them all the way forward, and they end up hitting a target inside 50, lace out, uncontested. It was as surreal a game of football from Geelong that I've seen in a very long time, and I think this is where the conversation of them being underrated needs to be had, because a lot of people tipped Brisbane in this game. A lot of people didn't give any respect to Geelong coming into this game, and we need to sit back and just take stock a little bit to the fact that Geelong could start any year off absolutely terribly, but would always find themselves in a position at the very least to be playing in a preliminary final. They always just gather around each other and find ways to win football, and it's a team that historically hasn't needed to rebuild ever at all. They're a destination club, so they're able to bring in all of these known players from different clubs to build around. When they hit the draft, they do it very cleverly, but they are never in a position where it's all hands on deck. We need to rebuild, we need to load in on young players, because they've got so many talented players on this list, from the younger kids right through to the seniors, and it's just incredible to see this club just continue to go from strength to strength. Brisbane, very similar circumstances, I feel, in the way of becoming this destination club. This year, they picked up Oscar Allen heading into the season, Sam Draper. They might have lost Callum Archie, but they've still got access to top tier and elite talent out of their academy. So they go to these drafts knowing exactly who they're going to be bringing in, and then they can retrospectively use other, draft picks to be able to bring in these players externally. The only difference with Geelong and Brisbane is I feel Brisbane hedge their bets a little bit too much on particular players, and when those players under-deliver, they fall apart. Whereas for Geelong, they have a list where if a couple of their main players don't rise to the occasion, there's another tier of players underneath that can rise up and bring them back into the game. And it was as comprehensive a performance from many Geelong players in this game that got them over the line in the end. The match timeline speaks volumes. At quarter time, Geelong led 5-5-35 to Brisbane's 2-1-13. At half time, minus a comeback from Brisbane late in the term, Geelong still led 8-9-57 to 7-3-45. At three-quarter time, Geelong led 14-11-95 to Brisbane's 10-6-66, and the final scoreline saw Geelong 17-15-117 defeat Brisbane 11-10-76. And when you break down the individual performances from players, we're going to turn attention momentarily to the team stats as well. Just as I said, the transitional football from Geelong just opened Brisbane up exponentially, and it wasn't a game where Geelong blew them out statistically. They led the disposals 404 to 381, so it was still a tight contest. The handball game, they had just shy of 30 more handballs, but those handballs in this game were so incredibly critical. They had 10 more inside 50s, so they just capitalized on their entries more often than not, especially in particular quarters. Every time Geelong was getting the ball inside 50, they were registering some kind of score. It was so impressive to watch. I mean, when we have a look at the breakdown of disposal efficiency around the ground, Geelong led 74.5% to Brisbane's 69.6%, which is well down on Brisbane's average for efficiency around the ground. Inside 50 efficiency, Geelong were only less than 3% better, which is wild when you consider the fact that Geelong had patches where, as I just said, they were getting the ball inside 50 and they were generating either a goal or a behind each and every time. I honestly thought the inside efficiency was a lot better than what the stat distribution lends itself to here. Free kicks, nothing really worth talking about. It was actually quite even. There was only 4 more free kicks paid for the game one side, the way of Brisbane, and I don't think the umpiring at all influenced any momentum. It was just Geelong purely. Each and every time they got the ball, you knew something was going to happen. It was, as I said, as far as performances go this year, to stake claim and show the rest of the competition that a team is truly here, this was Geelong's moment. This is the moment where Geelong scream out to the rest of the competition, talk about Sydney, talk about Fremantle, talk about how well Melbourne's doing. Pay attention to us because we're here to play. Stoppages. Brisbane won the hit-out game, which again, this was always going to be a little bit of push and pull, because when you look at Brisbane and Geelong in ruck stocks, they don't have an A-grader screaming out. They don't have a Gawn, they don't have a Grundy, they don't have a Cherry, a Jackson, an English, even a Nankervis type player. But 43 to 36 the way of Brisbane. The clearance game, Brisbane got on top of by 10, and just around the ground, they were just able to to find that dominance in that centre clearance, but Geelong just worked themselves back into it. They were always one step ahead with having a player behind play. It was just a very well executed game, not just from the players on the field, but from the coach's box as well. Just being able to move those magnets around and have enough, continuity in their game to know where to be, what to do. The loss of Dane Zorko pre-game out being managed, which I feel is something that we've seen a lot of over the last couple of weeks. Right at the last minute, a player out-managed. I don't understand how a player can be listed as managed late in the piece. It's either that they're playing or they're not. If they're out, there has to be an injury. It can't just be up until the last minute, oh, you know what? I changed my mind. We're not going to play you. We're going to play someone else. I think that's a bit ridiculous, but not at all suggesting Dane Zorko instantly changes this game and turns around a 41-point loss. But Dane Zorko is very much a quarterback type player in that defensive lineup for Brisbane. He has that leadership quality where he's able to just make sure players are set up, and you see it on field when the cameras cut to him. He'll be pointing to his teammates, telling people where to go, who to pick up, and just maneuvering those players around. Not to mention, with ball in hand, Dane Zorko is incredibly damaging even at his age. So having that lack of leadership out there, that know-how and that presence on the field, definitely had a little bit of communication breakdown, and you can see the defensive line of Brisbane was struggling for quite a period in this game, especially when Geelong turned it up in the second half. But again, can't attribute this loss to just having Dane Zorko out. This was a team that would have had a chip on their shoulder from the grand final last year. Jeremy Cameron breaks his arm during that game, still plays, but was ineffective. Tom Stewart didn't play in the grand final and showed in this game back to his intercepting best. It was a team-led performance. We can just rattle some names off here. And, when you look at the top-rated players on the field, I count here, out of the top 10, 2 players out of the top 10 rated players on the field were from Brisbane. Those players were Darcy Wilmot and Levi Ashcroft. 2 names, when retrospectively talking about Brisbane, are big because we know Darcy Wilmot and Levi Ashcroft are huge young talents, but you don't see a Lachie Neale, a Josh Dunkley, Charlie Cameron, Zach Bailey, Harris Andrews, these types of players that you would expect to be up and about, really down on input in this game and not having as much impact as they normally do. I mean, Charlie Cameron still did kick 3 goals for the game, but he only had 14 touches. He only laid 2 tackles. His forward pressure was pretty much non-existent. He kicked a couple of snags, all good and proper, but not the typical pressure-like performance we're used to seeing from him. Not the tackling prowess of Josh Dunkley. He only manages to lay 5 tackles for the game in a game where, just for example, spitballing a name, Bailey Smith lays 11 tackles. Now, I don't know as well whether Geelong's game plan is better suited to a wet style of game because the rain was pissing down. So it just came down to who could use the ball better in these circumstances, and could that be an undoing for Brisbane? Did Brisbane go into this game a little bit too tall? Did they hedge their bets on certain players overperforming or underperforming? I don't know, but when you rattle off names like Smith, Manor, Stewart, Holmes, Bruin, Atkins, Mullen, Neale, Cameron, the list just goes on and on. Geelong just had player after player after player lining up to just have impact on this game. Even if we go further down on the list, when you look at the top 10 lowest performing, a bulk of those still come out of Brisbane. You're talking about, again, some young kids in Curtin, Tunstall and Marshall, so you don't really hold them too accountable. But I mean, Jack Henry comes back into this Geelong side and normally plays a defensive game, plays up forward. He has only 5 disposals, but his manoeuvring in that forward 50 opened up space, and that is where Geelong differentiated themselves in this game. They had players that might not have had the impact that they usually do. Like Jack Martin only has 7 touches, Blitzarves only has 10 touches, but their their role in the team and the movement that they made allowed so much space to open up for other players to get off the chain. So it was a very comprehensive win for Geelong, but very selfless as well, which I think sets them up in a great stead moving forward. I still think Geelong finish as a top 4 team, still very much in the premiership window and a premiership threat, but just around the grounds, I don't think many people are paying much mind to them. Brisbane, still a top 8 contender for me. Is their best still good enough? Yes, it is. The only problem that now lays with Brisbane is last year, their best eclipsed so many other teams that were in the running, whereas this year, I feel their best is now eclipsed by other teams. Geelong's best is better than Brisbane's. Sydney's best is better than Brisbane's. Fremantle's best better than Brisbane. So for the first time in a long time, we have a fair few teams firming to put a shake on this competition, which as a neutral supporter is incredibly exciting. 2 games on Friday night. Again, I hate it. I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below about this double header crap. I feel if we're going to have fixtures compromised like this and having some great games having to be arm wrestled between people wanting to watch at home, let's just scrap round 0. Let's just do it. Or if you want to do a round 0, why not have everybody compete? That way we don't have double fixturing like this absolutely ruining the game. Just my opinion. But the first of 2 saw Sydney hosting Collingwood at the SCG. A game where Darcy Moore, obviously out, I believe it was with concussion this week, so another big kind of figurehead in that defensive line for Collingwood out, and he's just been very unlucky this year. Out with injury, comes back in, injured in the same game, he comes back out, comes back in, injured again, he's out again. I just don't know whether his body can keep copping these knocks and he can keep it all together. I don't know whether this is going to force his hand when it comes to leaving the game. Not entirely sure, but again, as well, some other players around the ground. No Tim Membry up forward, just losing a little bit of continuity in that forward half, where we know Collingwood have been struggling a fair bit. Forward half of the ball, I feel, is Collingwood's least potent line. Their most ineffective, part of their game is their forward half. And when you've got players like Bobby Hill on the out, you've got players like Jamie Elliott, who can kick a clutch goal or 2, but he's just down on output. When you're losing Tim Membry, Darcy Cameron doesn't play this game in the ruck, so you can't even afford to have that secondary tool that when you've got Esteen in the ruck and Darcy Cameron can go forward and vice versa. They just struggle a bit. And this game saw Craig McRae try to do something to shake things up a little bit. Obviously, James Jordan, very well known for his tagging role at Sydney. You'll all know coming into this game, James Jordan is going to be going to Nick Daicos. So what does Craig McRae do? Let's play Nick Daicos out of the forward 50. Let's take him out of that midfield. Let's take Jordan away from other players in that midfield as well. Let's force his hand. Let's make him play a defensive game. And let's use Nick Daicos as an offensive threat. Daicos comes out and has 28 touches and kicks 2 goals, which is a great return from Nick Daicos. And usually when Nick Daicos is firing, Collingwood are up and about. But again, just like the game prior with Geelong and their transitional game, Sydney's transitional game, I feel personally this season, is the best transitional game in the competition, especially when they use it by hand. Just having a Nick Blakey's run and carry off of halfback, moving it to Isaac Heaney, who is going to provide run and dash from the midfield with a more potent looking forward line. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. I just can't fault it. And when they start getting that game moving, something great is going to happen. Sydney are going to run out the game. And even though Collingwood come out in this game incredibly strong, I said at quarter time, I said at half time, I turned to my dad and I look at him and I said, Collingwood have had this hot start, but I can guarantee you Sydney come back and win this game. They're going to flip the switch and it's just going to turn on its head. At quarter time, Collingwood led 5-2-32 to 1-4-10. And at halftime, they led 6-9-45 to 3-6-24. Even with those gaps in those quarters, I was confident that Sydney would get the game on their terms, and you can attribute it to some injuries through the game as well, which I think definitely did play a big hand, especially when Oscar Steen went down in the ruck. He's done his ACL, so he's out for the rest of the year for Collingwood. So Darcy Cameron, when he does come back in, is going to need to run a solo game. He's going to have to go to being that number one ruckman again. He's not going to have much support outside of maybe a Dan McStay having to double up around the contest. As soon as that happened and he went down, Grundy was rucking against the likes of McStay and even Ned Long in patches, and Ned Long isn't a ruckman, he's a midfielder, he's an outside runner. So even though he's got a little bit of height on him, Grundy just took the game by the throat and choked the ever-living fuck out of it. It was as dominant a ruck performance as you would come to expect when you're not rucking against ruckmen, but Grundy just absolutely turned this game on its head. The run and carry from Blakey wasn't really working in that first half, but once he got up and going, once Heaney started firing, these players are so critical to Sydney's success. I feel everybody looks at a Heaney and goes, Heaney has to fire, otherwise they're not going to win. But I feel Nick Blakey is probably their barometer. He's the type of player where if he starts getting disposals and he starts getting his run and carry going and he starts building a little bit of momentum, he is very hard to stop. And that slingshot from half back to half forward is absolutely incredible. Similar with Tom Papley up forward as well. He is very much a barometer for Sydney in many ways too. If he's firing and kicking goals, he's, score involvements and just his ability forward half of the ball and his forward craft to be able to bring other players into the contest is absolutely incredible. And if this game has shown us anything around the contest, it's shown us that Sydney, as I said, as far as their run and carry game goes, best in the competition, and once they get it going, very hard to stop. So is this the type of gameplay that we are going to see this year that wins a premiership? Because they're not the only ones that are priding themselves on that half back to half forward run and carry and that transitional game. Many teams try to do it, but I don't think many do it as well as Sydney. Maybe minus one team, which we will talk about later on in the piece. Collingwood here, even though Nick Dacos had a solid game, as I said, normally you attribute Collingwood to winning games off the back of that. There were just some players that fell a little bit short, some players that made skill errors that we're not used to seeing. The pressure around the contest that Sydney was applying was forcing fumbles and turnovers. And a Jordan De Goey, for example, started this game off hot, but as the game went on, just failed to fire. I don't know whether we attribute that to maybe a fitness issue. I'm not entirely sure. Dan Houston having a good year, but he wasn't firing on all cylinders as we normally see him firing. It was very, very strange to see that players that normally for Collingwood we would see up and about just didn't live up to expectation or fire any shots when the game was on the line and to be had. I don't know whether hands are being forced into having to play players in certain positions. I've got personal takes on what I think Collingwood should be doing. I personally feel, for example, Josh Dacos playing as an inside midfielder would change that midfield core exponentially. You've already got a Dan Houston to play that kind of halfback launching role for Collingwood in that defensive line. You've even got Isaac Quaynor back there who can do the same. So why not have Nick and Josh lining up in those centre bounces? You know they love to get the ball into each other's hands. Use that around the contest as much as you can. Just my personal opinion. Again, statistically, for all the dominance that was seen on the field, Sydney didn't put that much of a gap in way of the amount of touches they had collectively as a team. They led the disposals 401 to 373, so less than 30 disposals difference between the two. But again, the quality that they delivered for the quantity that they had was absolutely incredible to see around the ground. Again, inside 50s, a completely more dominant game. I mean, 71 inside 50s to Collingwood's 56. Collingwood actually had more inside 50s in this game than their seasonal average of 52, and Sydney monstered their inside 50 average from 63 to 71. So it was absolutely incredible to see that both teams were getting good looks, and both teams at certain points, I mean, at Collingwood in that first half were dominant. Sydney in the second half ran away with it, but the disposal efficiency, the inside 50 efficiency, both of these teams in very, very particular moments could have either turned the game on its head in the way of Collingwood being able to get back into the game and win, or Sydney putting their foot down and running away with a much bigger margin was well and truly on the line here. Both teams running at a little over or a little under 69% around the ground, which is down on their efficiency by foot and by hand. But inside 50, Collingwood was actually more efficient. They had 48% efficiency inside, which is up from their 45% average, but Sydney, usually firing at 52%, down to only 42% in this game. And they had many opportunities where they could have and should have piled on more goals, but unfortunately wasn't to be the case. A lot of people talking about the free kick count in this game, and a lot of people attributing Sydney's win to umpires looking after them. Now, the free kick count was 52 paid for the game, 21 going to Collingwood, 31 going to Sydney. But when you break down the freeze for and freeze against, what was happening, especially in that second half after Oscar Steen was out of the game, Brodie Grundy was finding himself on the back end of a lot of free kicks because he was being held and scragged in the ruck contest because, unfortunately, either lack of ruck craft from Collingwood or just attempting to try to keep Grundy out of the game as best as they can was leading to him getting all of these free kicks, which is where most of this differentiation comes from. So I don't at all think that this outcome was due to umpiring officiating when you have a look at the freeze for, freeze against, especially who got paid what. But it's easy to point finger when you see a 10 free kick gap between teams, which isn't going to be the first time we see more than 10 free kicks paid more so to another team than others this particular round. Around the contest, again, as I said, Brodie Grundy himself had more hitouts than all of the attempts from Collingwood combined, 52 to 10. However, that ruck dominance didn't translate in clearances because even though 42 more hitouts were had by Sydney, Sydney only won the clearance game by 3 particular clearances, and that was stoppage clearance, not centre clearance. So you have a look at that, and I think as a Collingwood supporter, you take that as a win because you've got no ruckman, but you've still got these players in your midfield core that are still able to get first use because they're smart enough to read the play from the opposition, which I think is what kept Collingwood in the game as much as it did late in the piece. Possession, as I said, was only marginally in the way of Sydney. They both turned the ball over, the same amount of times, 80 turnovers, but where Sydney was able to take the sting out of the game a little bit was the way that they both play a very similar brand, Collingwood and Sydney. They like to slow things down and run the game off of their own momentum, but Sydney were able to do it in such an emphatic way. 89 marks to 66. They were able to set themselves up to launch that handball game, to get that run and carry. And when you have a look around the ground and you see that the handball game didn't have much in it. Actually, Collingwood had 2 more handballs than Sydney did, 168 to 170. But that run and carry game was just more efficient from Sydney. They were able to slow things down, and then as soon as they sucked Collingwood in, they were able to get that run and carry going, that easy transitional ball, chipping it around and then finding those handballs to fire off. It was absolutely brilliant. And you attribute that, I feel, to how Sydney have been able to just have certain players step up into roles this year and really flourish. I feel Sydney at this point in time have 4 players at the very least knocking on the door of All-Australian selection. Brodie Grundy, Isaac Heaney, Nick Blakey, and Justin McInerney. And outside of that, you've still got Tom Papley who fires. And when you look at, we can look at player statistics and we can do breakdowns here. Papley kicks 2 goals, but then you have a look at the score involvements from the touches he had. He has 7. Chad Warner has 9 score involvements. Isaac Heaney has 9. Brodie Grundy, he manages to get 6. Jai Sarong has 5. McInerney has 5. Mills plays in defence. Him and Jake Lloyd both had 4. So everybody just getting involved, and you're not particularly having to rely on just Isaac Heaney in the midfield to do any damage. You don't need a Chad Warner to pop off, because there is such a list of players here lining up to get things done. Whereas for Collingwood, you've got your Nick Dacos that stands tall. Jordan De Goey shot fires early but dropped off. And then outside of that, the more senior players, the more, seasoned in the way of playing and, expecting certain things from, kind of dropped off a little bit. And it's a bit rough. They've got players out through injury. I feel some players coming back in definitely changed the trajectory of Collingwood. Definitely feel Darcy Moore back in defence shores things up a hell of a lot better, especially when, he plays that fullback role. It allows Jeremy Howe to float off and intercept a bit more, and then vice versa. But Jeremy Howe becomes more accountable when Darcy Moore's not in the team. Same with Tim Membry up forward. You've got that ability to send McStay up or Membry up a little bit more forward half of the ball and be more transitional, whereas one of them out means the other one's going to stay down deep, and it just doesn't work. There's no cohesiveness. Bobby Hill coming into this team gives X factor and speed, which I think they're lacking forward half. So can't truly write Collingwood off here. I still feel Collingwood finish in that, that 7 to 10 wild card kind of configuration. But Sydney, as far as I'm concerned, playing the best football in the competition. Feel free to disagree. We then go up to Darwin for the second game on Friday night, which sees the Gold Coast take on Port Adelaide. And if there's any takeaway for the Gold Coast out of this, it's never to back against them when they play in northern states. We know that at People's First, they play out of their skin. They become a completely different being. But up in Darwin, I don't think they're ever going to be beaten. They just acclimatise to Darwin's, weather conditions and the ground conditions, and they just get around the people up there so incredibly well that it almost serves as a secondary, home base for them. It's always, even though here they're playing as the home team, it's almost like they have home ground advantage in a neutral location that teams shouldn't have dominance or advantage on. They just came out of the blocks in this game so incredibly hard, and if it wasn't for efforts early and throughout the game from players like Zach Butters, this game should have blown out by a much bigger proportion, by a much larger amount. And at one point it did look like it was going to be that way, which then we can turn attention to Port Adelaide. If Zach Butters does get traded at the end of this year, there are rumours also now floating around that Mitch Georgiades might be on the out. There's talk that Miles Bergman still could be traded elsewhere. If this is the case, then what we have learnt is Port Adelaide's free fall is going to become so incredibly dire. It is not funny. If it's not for the effort of Zach Butters, sometimes just with tackling pressure and just his presence in the midfield, they get blown out of the water so incredibly early. Jason Horne-Francis can step up into a role, sure, but he sometimes isn't firing on all cylinders. Sometimes he's needed as a forward player more as a midfielder. So it starts to really beg question as to where Port Adelaide are truly suited. Now, Gold Coast win this game by 25 points, and you think, well, Port Adelaide have done well, and to their credit, they have, especially given the fact with 13 behinds, they could have stemmed the flow much more so and could have made it a closer game. But as I said, if you look at the match timeline, especially when it got into late parts of the third quarter, this game was looking like it was going to be a 10 plus goal blowout. At quarter time, Gold Coast led 5-2 32 to 2-4 16. At halftime, they led 11-3 69 to 6-6 42. It then ballooned out to a 40-point lead at three-quarter time, 14-6 90, leading 7-8 50. And in that final term, Gold Coast only managed to kick one goal too, to finish 15-8 98. Port Adelaide came out and kicked 3 goals 5 to finish on 10-13 73. What could have been? I mean, 5 behinds that could have easily been 2 or 3 goals, and they're only losing by a kick or two. Again, I don't know whether we can attribute that to Gold Coast taking their foot off the gas because they were 40 points up and they got a little bit complacent. We've seen that from the Gold Coast in pieces before. Or do we attribute this to Port Adelaide actually rising to the challenge and bringing the game back on their own terms? I feel there's no true answer here. We're left in limbo quite some bit trying to decipher how this game played out. As I said, at one point it looked like it was going to be 10 plus goals the way of the Gold Coast. They just in that third quarter looked like they could not be faulted. They just transitioned the ball easier. They made Port Adelaide look stagnant around the ground, and it was it was dire. But then again, to Port Adelaide's credit, they fight back. But again, do we attribute that to a fight back? Do we attribute that to being complacent on Gold Coast side? I don't know. Statistically, close game in the clinches. Disposals went the way of the Gold Coast, 389 to 355. So again, just getting a little bit more quality on their return. The kicking game, handball game, all the way of the Gold Coast. Inside 50s, they only had 7 more. 62 inside versus 55, both well and truly up on their seasonal averages. Around the ground, Gold Coast were just more efficient, and that's where I feel that third quarter burst came from, running at 77.6% versus Port Adelaide running at 68.2. Inside 50, both were running at sub 50%, both down on their averages. Gold Coast only running at a 43.5% inside 50, with Port Adelaide running at a 49.1. Free kick count, 14 to 22, the way of Port Adelaide. So, especially late in the game, there was some free kicks going the way of Port Adelaide, which I don't know whether you can attribute that to their comeback. If you want to go down that route, I don't think so. Even contest in the ruck, 39 to 33. The clearance game, Port Adelaide absolutely dominated, 41 to 30. Now, this is where I want to bring up a little bit of a negative slant with the Gold Coast, because while they perform out of their skin when they go to Darwin, they play well at people's first, this on paper boasts what could potentially be the best, if not one of the best, midfields in the competition, with Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson, Tuke Miller, Christian Petrarca, and then the next tier of players that kind of fill in and get into the middle outside of that. And whenever they have had all 4 in this team, they don't look as good as what they could be or should be. I don't know if I'm reading into that a little bit too much. Feel free to disagree. Let's talk about it down below. But either 1 or 2 of them will have a great game, and then 1 or 2 of them just don't impact at all. Whereas the big what if is how good could the Gold Coast be with all 4 of these players firing on all cylinders? I was thinking about it the other day, and I said to my dad, I said, how good of a team would the Gold Coast be right now had they have kept Isaac Rankin this whole time? Imagine having an Isaac Rankin coming through the middle, playing as that high half forward. I don't know whether they land a Christian Petrarca in a trade period if he was still there, but imagine a team that had a rotation of Rowell, Anderson, Rankin, Petrarca, Miller. Holy shit. It's to be, needs to be seen to be believed. They would need to be studied hard, but it's just weird that having all of these top elite players, you'd think that the Gold Coast would be untouchable, but some of these players, just some weeks, have a bit of a down week, and I don't know whether they can attribute that because another player just steps up and takes that role. I'm not too sure. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but the Gold Coast around the ground, not too much better. I mean, the marking game was absolutely dominated by the Gold Coast, 94 to 57, but that's how we know the Gold Coast operate, especially in that defensive half. We know John Noble, for example, is going to get a lot of the ball, and I feel for big parts in this game, he was one of the better players on the ground. But when you think of the numbers that he gets, and we can quickly rattle them off here when we look at all the marks. You got McAndrew that takes 9 marks. John Noble takes 8. Oscar Adams takes 8. Joel Jeffrey takes 7. Sam Collins takes 7. Bodie Hewland takes 8. These are all defensive players that are taking marks and utilising the ball in the back half to kick back and relocate. And that is what a lot of teams are doing this year. With this stand rule, you don't see anything forward half of the ball. So instead of doing the haphazard thing of just banging the ball long and hoping for the best, you're happy to take 20, 30, 40, 50 meters backwards, sideways to reset, shift the whole ground across, and then try to launch the opposite way. So that's something that Damien Hardwick thrived on at Richmond, trying to get that reconfiguration. He's taken that to the Gold Coast and it works incredibly well. And that is, again, what helps set up that 40-point difference at three-quarter time. Being able to just shift the ball, get things on their terms, and then you know that run and carry is coming. You know they love getting the handball off. You know they'll happily chip around to try to find space. That's exactly what they did, and that's exactly what they delivered. But where I'm still kind of, again, using the word in limbo with this club, is at the start of the year, they looked like they were going to be a top 4 lock. But at this point in time, they've dropped off from the caliber of football they delivered in those first 4 to 5 rounds. They still finish... Oh, do they still finish top 6? Is the question. They'd want to, because you wouldn't want to be a club like the Gold Coast with the amount of talent they've got and what they showed the first half of the season to finish in that 7 to 10 and then lose to a 9th or 10th placed team and not play finals. And that's what's going to be the case for a lot of teams vying for those spots. You don't want to be landing in that wildcard round, playing such good football, and then knocked out by a team who in other seasons wouldn't even be in calculation, which is going to be the big underlying factor moving forward with this wildcard round. Port Adelaide, on the other hand, they fight tough. They stick to it. But again, I just don't know where we attribute that to. When we look at the highest rated players on the field, Zach Butters was the second highest rated player, just behind John Noble and just ahead of Noah Anderson. I feel Noah Anderson's input as far as longevity went for the game has him placed as best on ground, my personal opinion. But outside of Zach Butters, if it wasn't for Willem Drew doing a lockdown roll around the ground on players like Petrarca, nobody else really stands tall. You don't see a Horn Francis. You don't see, Kane Farrell off of defense having as big of a game as he usually has. So that's why I say, if they lose a Butters, they lose a Mitch Georgiades. When we look at the goal kickers for this game, Mitch Georgiades, did he score? He kicked only one goal. He kicked 1 goal 3. Could have very well kicked 3 or 4 and turns the game on its head. But you take Georgiades out of this forward 50, who is their main target, forward half of the ball. You lose a Zach Butters. You lose drive from a Miles Bergman, who didn't play this game because he's out injured with having surgery done, so he's going to miss 10 to 12 weeks, I think they said. But you lose players like that. What happens? They've got Connor Rozee out injured. When he comes back in, does he exponentially change this team? I don't know. I feel the word limbo and the location limbo is the best place to throw both of these teams here, because we don't know which way of that side they're going to be going. But at any rate, the Gold Coast still pick up the win. They still better their chances at a finals berth again, and I still feel they can do damage. It's just the cohesiveness I feel for a list that is so stacked of talent sometimes is a little bit, to be desired, a little bit lackluster, given what we could get versus what we're given. Just my opinion. The first game on Saturday, we could probably quickly skip over because this was an absolute drubbing, and I'm left scratching my head as to how this blew out to as big of a margin as it did. Adelaide hosting North Melbourne at Adelaide Oval, with Adelaide walking away with a 68-point win. Moments before this game went live, I was actually tempted to change my tip from Adelaide to North Melbourne because Riley Thilthorpe wasn't playing in this game. This is a forward line that had no Tex Walker, no Riley Thilthorpe, their number 1 and their number 2 key forward targets. This is an Adelaide outfit that defensively is still hurting, I feel, because of no Mark Keane, no Mitchell Hinge. Jordan Dawson has been in and out of this team, and obviously with losing his brother a few weeks back, some could question whether or not his mind is fully invested in the game. And that's no knocking Jordan Dawson, but going through grief can impact you physically, mentally. But that wasn't the case at all. This is a forward line that fired without those key forwards. This is a back line that worked without those defenders. Jordan Dawson, the last couple of outings, has actually been amongst Adelaide's best. If anything, he's come back out with a reinvigoration for football. He's turned his grief into power, and this was as comprehensive a beatdown as we have seen all year. So much so that media experts are backing off of talking about North Melbourne in a positive light. A couple of weeks ago, for example, Nick Riewoldt made the comment saying we shouldn't be talking about North Melbourne in the vein of rebuilding ever again, because North Melbourne have finally pushed out of it. This past week, after this outcome, he's gone back on his words and called himself an idiot for saying that, because North Melbourne in this game very much look like they're still within that rebuild. They haven't jumped ahead from that, and there's some key points out of this that we can touch on. I feel the biggest talking point out of this is utilization of players for North Melbourne. I feel there are some players that haven't really lived up to expectation, played to standard, and one of those players, as much as some North Melbourne supporters might hate me saying it, is Nick Larkey, the captain. If I quickly just grab the stats that I've jotted down here. Over the last 5 games, so we go back to round 6, he had 7 disposals and kicked 2 goals. In round 7, against GWS, 16 disposals, 4 goals. He had 9 disposals and 1 goal in round 8. In round 9, had 8 disposals and 2 behinds. And in this past week, in this particular game, 8 disposals and 1 goal. I feel as a captain, there should be a standard being set, and I know he plays as a key forward, so they're not ever going to get huge numbers every week. But the talent that Nick Larkey has, I feel he's better utilised outside of that forward 50. Let him press up the ground. Let him be a transitional player, kind of like a Tex Walker. When you've got players like Trembath deep forward, you've still got players like Jack Darling deep forward. Let them be your forward 50 markers. Nick Larkey, great use of the ball, great set of hands. Let him get into the play. Let him float up a little bit. Other players in this game very much failed to deliver as well. If we want to touch on players from North Melbourne straight up, like we rattle off here, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Of the top 20 rated players on the field, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 20 were from North Melbourne. 14 players from Adelaide: James Peatley, Jordan Dawson, Isaac Rankin, Rory Laird, Toby Murray, Sam Berry, Josh Worrell, Wayne Millerer, Josh Rochelle, Jake Saligo, Braden Cook, Lachlan McAndrew, James Borlase, and Zach Taylor. And then outside of that, the gap is huge. Of the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Of the bottom 20 performing players, 5 are from Adelaide. That is incredible. That is insane. This was as huge a differentiation between players, between teams that I've seen in a very long time. Especially with the outs that Adelaide have had, I thought North Melbourne would have been more competitive. And it was in the first quarter, because at quarter time, Adelaide only led by 4 points. 4 goals, 2-26, leading 3-4, 22. But outside of that, it just became so one-sided. The game was dead at half-time. 14-6-90 led 3-6-24. North Melbourne only kicked 2 behinds for that second term. Adelaide went on to kick 10 goals 4. And then for the next half of football, North Melbourne only managed to kick themselves 6 goals 5 for the game. And Adelaide go on to kick a further 6 goals 5, 7. 6 goals 7. But again, you can probably say, well, they only kicked 6 goals for a half. But when you that far in front at half time, and you still take the foot off the gas, and there's very minimal scoring, and Pressure might have been lifted a little bit in that second half to still lead at three-quarter time, 18-11, 119 to 5-8, 38. And then the full-time score, 20-13, 133, defeating 9-11, 65. So one-sided, so lopsided. And at many points when Adelaide just had the ball, pressure was non-existent from North Melbourne. They were able to get around so easily. They were missing tackles. They were fumbling the ball. The pressure that Adelaide applied was forcing turnover more often than not. This was, boy oh boy, it just poses questions as to whether, again, speaking about the Brisbane-Geelong game at the start of this video and questioning whether people have been underrating Geelong and overrating North Melbourne. Have people been underrating Adelaide and maybe overrating North Melbourne at where they're at with their rebuild right now? That could be a question. I don't know whether this is just a blip on the radar. North Melbourne, I think I heard some ridiculous stat that of the last 20 odd times North Melbourne have gone to Adelaide, they have lost. So they don't play well in South Australia. So does that play into effect in any way? When you look at the team stats, 68 points the way of Adelaide for this game. They only had 67 more disposals around the ground, 387 leading 320. The kicking game, they led by 40. The handball game, they had less than 30. Inside 50s, Adelaide only had 5 more inside 50s for the game, 49 leading 44. But it was just North Melbourne getting the ball inside 50. The intercept marks were happening. They were able to just transition the ball out of that defense with little to no effort. Efficiency around the ground. Adelaide just monstered their averages here. Like they were better by 3% by disposal efficiency, by hand, by foot. But inside 50, their average for the season has ran at 51.8%. And in this particular game, they ran at 75.5%. They were 24% better inside 50 in this one game than they have been all season. It was almost this is a fork in the road kind of game here, because this is a game where Adelaide have not only percentage boosted, but they've got so much momentum coming out of this game. And I honestly feel, call me crazy, taking on Hawthorn in Tasmania this coming round, I'm actually thinking Adelaide are going to cause an upset this week. That could be a big call. Around the traps, pretty even with deliberation umpire-wise with free kick count. The hitouts, Tristan Cherry led the hitouts, 45-32. But Adelaide's ruckman in McAndrew and pinch hitting by Murray, I feel they played better games than what Cherry did collectively around the ground. Again, clearances, 9 more the way of Adelaide. Especially at the stoppage clearance. They were just, at the stoppage, they were almost unstoppable. Uncontested possessions, they had 51 more. They had 26 more contested. Turned the ball over less. The marking game, they led 105-77, just attributed to that defensive pressure, because as we turn attention to individual player stats and we look at marking, you have all of those defensive pressure type players taking a big amount of marks. Rory Laird, Isaac Cumming, James Borlase, Peatling from transition, Worrell. These players were just sitting under the ball, and North Melbourne were getting looks inside 50, and Adelaide were just swallowing the intercept marks. If we turn deliberation to intercept possessions, which we can happily do, Rory Laird, 7, Worrell, 5, James Borlase, 5, Millerer, 4, Jordan Butts is in there, Nankervis is in there, Isaac Cumming is in there. Incredible effort. This was, as I said, as comprehensive a win as you will see all year. This was a game that looked like it was going to be a great arm wrestle, and then all of a sudden a flip switched and a flip switched? Did I say a flip switched? A switch flipped. See, I'm so delusional and carried away by this thing that I'm going fucking insane. But I think we need to take stock here and really try to understand where these teams are currently at. Is North Melbourne over exceeding expectation? Maybe a little bit. I personally felt they would be out of bottom 4 contention this year and truly on that rise. But after seeing how they performed this game, questions need to be asked. And I know that's rich coming from a Richmond fan. This is all completely, you know, based on my own interpretation. So if you disagree, if you agree, it's something we can talk about. But this just had me so dumbfounded. I honestly thought North Melbourne were primed for an upset here, and I just don't know what happened. On the flip side of things with Adelaide perform well and then they kind of drop off a little bit. Like, they defeated Richmond only 2 weeks ago by 30 odd points in a game where for 3 quarters Richmond really challenged them, and then the following week they come out like they're a premiership contending team and they walk away with a huge percentage boosting win. It's hard to get your head around where these guys are at, especially given the key components that are missing for Adelaide right now. Once they come back in, is Adelaide a finals contending team still? They just haven't dropped off. I honestly thought Adelaide would be the team to drop off. Every year you have that top 8 configuration and you have at least one team drop out of that top 8 the following year. And even though they were minor premiers last year, I thought their 2025 heavily consisted of a fixtured setting that gave them more home games, an easier run, kind of padded a little bit to get them to where they got, despite the talent that they have. But this, boy, if they can play football like this on a consistent basis, I think every team needs to be worried. The next game was at the MCG, Melbourne, Hawthorn. Melbourne have been playing some real exciting football, and something that not many people seem to be talking about is their ability to score regardless of not having the most potent of forward lines. When you look at the fact that Harrison Petty, defender turned forward, has often had to be thrown down there. Bailey Fritsch, I still maintain, is one of the most selfish players in the AFL, don't even get me started. And Van Ruin can either kick 5 one week or 0 the next. So there is definitely a little bit of disconnect forward half. They're lucky that they've got Sparrow, Chandler, Pickett, these type of midfielder hybrids that can hit the scoreboard at the capacity that they do. And on the flip side, Hawthorn starts the year off strong, undefeated, then starts hitting a slump. They've lost Tom Barrass to a hamstring injury. They've lost Jack Gunston, who potentially could miss another round. And it's got people talking. Not just the AFL supporter base, but the media fraternity as well. And the biggest talking point I feel to come out of this game, what we have learnt from this game, is to question whether or not Hawthorn's depth is truly there or not. And we can look to the VFL this particular round. Hawthorn played Richmond's VFL team. I know this because I watched the game. And Hawthorn had 14 AFL listed players play in that particular game. So they have plenty of players that can be selected, but key position players seem to be few and far between. Now, Tom Barrass is out, so they've got the young Ryan in that position. Gunston is out. They don't have Chol due to injury as well, so Mitch Lewis has had to kind of step up a little bit. Ramsden's had to step up a little bit. But outside of those replacements that we see, I don't think there is anybody that can fit that hole. And the question now remains, at the ages that Barrass and Gunston are, if Hawthorn are reliant on Gunston being up forward to have to kick 3, 4, 5 goals a week, or they're relying on Barrass's defensive, mindset and ability put into practice, are they hedging their bets on players that within the next 1 to 2 years are going to retire? And then what comes of that? Let's look at the stats. Let's break down the game and we'll talk about it as we go on. At quarter time, it was a dead heat. 3 goals, 3-21 apiece. At halftime, Melbourne had wrestled a little bit of momentum that way and led 6-6-42 to 5-6-36. At 3-quarter time, 20-point lead to Melbourne. 12-8-80, leading 9-6-60. And then the final scoreline saw Melbourne 18-12-120 defeat Hawthorn 12-9-81. Melbourne, over their last 6, 7, 8 games, has managed to draw more than 100 points on the scoreboard, as I said, with those players that I mentioned earlier in the piece, just moments ago. It's very, very much a part of their game plan that needs to be admired. Stephen King has come in as this outsider that not many people knew how he would approach this coaching role. He's not a Hinkley, he's not a Simpson, he's not a Longmire, so we're not getting any semblance of what could be as a coach from Stephen King. But having done a stint underneath Chris Scott as an assistant coach, learning from one of, if not the best coach in the competition, has put Stephen King in such good stead, because he's been able to implement things that Geelong has done over the last few years while he's been there into this young Melbourne team. And not many people, I think, would have expected Melbourne to achieve what they have done so far, given the fact that they don't have Christian Petrarca, they don't have Clayton Oliver, and arguably, alongside Max Gawn, those three have been synonymous with being their best players over the course of the last, 4, 5, 6 years, including the fact that Jack Viney hasn't been playing. They've lost Stephen May, who would argue, outside of the shit he's done off the field, has been one of their best defenders over the last few years as well. So again, they just rise to the occasion. Melbourne have just got something about them, and surprisingly enough, this was on the back of a performance where Kozzy Pickett was pretty much non-existent. Actually, back-to-back weeks, Kozzy Pickett's dropped off a little bit. I don't know whether the media is beating him up a little bit more than what they should. I kind of take exception to the fact of when they're talking about who the top 5 players are, who the top 10, who the top 20 are, and they're trying to say Kozzy Pickett is the top 5 player, when the last few weeks have shown there is still a huge gap between his best and his worst. And I don't think a player that can be touted as a top 5 can have that far of a gap between. That's just my personal take. Feel free to disagree. But they're playing some really inspired and fun football. Just seeing the young kids that have stepped up with opportunity and how they react when they kick a goal and they celebrate with one another and they get around one another. This is a Melbourne team that is reinvigorated, and I feel very strongly about the fact that this turn has come because they have gotten rid of Simon Goodwin. I know Simon Goodwin took them to a premiership, and good on him for doing so, but there is a reason Adelaide were happy to see Simon Goodwin go. There was a reason, I personally feel anyway, that a certain culture started getting developed within Melbourne's ranks that hit Clayton Oliver rather hard, hit Joel Smith rather hard. Feel free to read between the lines. While Simon Goodwin was there, they moved some players on, they get draft picks, they hit that draft hard, they've brought in some incredible talent, and the young kids that they already had on the list are starting to step up to the next level. It is a true rebuild that has gone right. So many teams over the course, West Coast and North Melbourne are the prime examples, have been rebuilding for 3, 4, 5 years. Melbourne essentially have done this on a 12-month turnaround. They've cashed in all those draft picks for Petrarca. Clayton Oliver moves on. They use what capital they get from him as well. And they have just managed to create something so incredibly great to watch as a neutral supporter. So great. And I'm just, enthralled whenever Melbourne play now. I'm just very keen to see how they go about it. Whether or not there will be a downfall when older players leave is to be seen. Obviously, a Melbourne without Max Gawn is going to be a much different Melbourne kind of outlook, but right now they're looking really good. They're looking red hot. And on the flip side, Hawthorn, unfortunately, as I mentioned, they've got plenty of available players to choose from, but the gap between the players that they're relying on and the players that are needing to fill those gaps, too far apart. Way too far apart. And Hawthorn supporters might not like that fact that I'm talking about it, but hey, again, just my own opinion. Breaking down the team stats for this game. From memory, it was a very close contest in way of things around the ground, and it was. Actually, Hawthorn had 30 more disposals than Melbourne did. They had one more inside 50 than Melbourne did. They ran at less than 1% disposal efficiency, worse than Melbourne, but the inside 50 efficiency was blown out of proportion. Melbourne, 51.8%, so every time they went in, 50% of the time they're scoring. 43% for Hawthorn, which is down on a 54.9% average, which is huge. Hawthorn had plenty of it, but just, and this is a game as well, when you look at the scoreline, Melbourne kicked 12 behinds. This was a game that could have been blown out again by a 10 plus goal margin, which would have been more shocking than the 39 points that we actually did get dished up. Surprisingly, Hawthorn dominated the rucking, 42-25, the way of Hawthorn. But again, as we have seen over similar circumstance during the course of this year, the team that dominates the ruck isn't always getting first use out of the centre clearance, because Melbourne won the clearances 38-34. Only marginable, don't get me wrong, but when you have that much of a difference in rucking, considering Melbourne run at an average of 42 hitouts a game and only managed the 25 out of this one, huge. But again, that's attributed to the way Stephen King is building this team. He's been sending Max Gawn inside the forward 50 as a viable forward 50 target and allowing Max Heath to take the ruck. If it was Max Gawn doing solo rucking, I think this hit-out differentiation would be a little bit more lopsided the way of Melbourne. Possession game, uncontested possessions is where Hawthorn had more. It was the contested possessions where Melbourne won in that centre configuration. Both teams taking over 90 marks for the game. 94 the way of Melbourne, 109 the way of Hawthorn. Both teams very happy to try to take the sting out of the game, especially in moments early where the game was still on the line to be won. But just again, just comprehensive one-sided the way of Melbourne. It was very much in that last quarter, similar kind of circumstance to what we saw with Melbourne taking on Richmond in the Anzac Eve game, where it was an arm wrestle for a bit, but then in that last quarter, back end of the third quarter, just run away with absolute dominance, and there was no stopping them. It was just goal after goal after goal, and they were getting it from easy clearance and stoppage within the forward 50. They were just handballing willy-nilly with no pressure, and it was just writing on the wall. I think the one play that exudes how both teams played this was late in the game. Hawthorn go to move the ball from the wing to half-back. They stuff the kick up. They handball it to James Sicily under pressure, runs away from the ball carrier, tries to duck into a contest to draw a free, gets pinned holding the ball, Melbourne score a goal. The one play that I think just sums this whole game up and speaks volumes as to how both teams played, because the one thing we are not used to seeing with Hawthorn is having insurmountable amount of pressure put on that it forces turnover, but not even actual pressure. I'm talking implied pressure, just more mindset than physicality. There was a play late where I think it was maybe Josh Battle had the ball forward half for Hawthorn, didn't have anything to go to, so he tried to kick backwards and center it up. Absolutely stuffed up the kick. So much so that the Hawthorn defender he was trying to kick it to, under pressure, had to get a handball to James Sicily. Now, Sicily had space, don't get me wrong, but he started running towards Melbourne's goal to try and make some more space, and as a tackle was starting to come in, he kind of attempted to duck his head and kind of swoop to get that upper motion to get a head high free, and he got done for holding the ball. And that's not something we're used to seeing break down with Hawthorn. That defensive half, we're used to seeing transition that ball across really well. They find opportunities forward half of the ball, but they were just under so much pressure that not even, as I just said, it's implied pressure, not just the physical pressure where they're getting tackled and turnover, but more so just unforced errors. They weren't hitting targets with kicking. They were stuffing up handballs. They were dropping marks. This was a very lackluster performance from Hawthorn in the way of how they started their season to where they are now. It's a huge drop-off, and they're still scoring 80 points, still very commendable, but if they're relying on Gunston to win games, if they're relying on Barras to win games, I think they're finding themselves in a bit of a precarious position moving forward. Whereas Melbourne, they're happy to just have kids continuously line up, hit the scoreboard, put their hands up to get involved. I am infinitely, right now, loving what Melbourne are doing on the field more than what Hawthorn have been doing. We then shift from the MCG to Marvel Stadium, where Josh Fraser took the reins as Carlton interim head coach for the very first time, with Carlton hosting the Western Bulldogs. We all know the Bulldogs have been hit with injury, and I think a lot of their losses that they have had can be attributed to the players that they have lost and the caliber of players they have lost. Tim English out of that ruck forced, in this particular game at least, for Rory Lobb to play in the ruck. That takes Rory Lobb out of centre-half back, where he has solidified himself as a very admirable key defender. No Tom Liberatore in that midfield. Loses a lot of tackling pressure around the contest, which is what Libba prides himself on. Ed Richards has been in and out with injury. Bontempelli is carrying injury. Sam Darcy, the unicorn, missing from that forward half, means Aaron Norton is getting double teamed in that defensive line for whatever opposition lines up against him, because he's the only legitimate key forward there. They've got youngsters around them, but again, the Bulldogs are in a very similar circumstance to Hawthorn, in the way of their A-list players are right there for everyone to see, but the tier underneath is too big of a gap between. At least with Hawthorn, we have seen a little bit of evolution from players like West, from players like Sanders, Buku Kama stepping up into the role. I think Selwood in defence has been great for the Bulldogs. But Carlton came to play and ended up picking up a win after a very long stint of not having one. I mean, their only win prior to this was against Richmond by less than a kick in round 1. And they walk away with 4 points on the board, 12 points the victor, but it wasn't without a little bit of a joke to be made at the end of the game. They were 4 goals ahead and there was about a minute or so left on the clock. Bulldogs kick a goal and I turned to my dad and I said, hey, 3 goals in a minute, it can be done. Then they kick another one. I'm like, oh, you're kidding. There is no way in a minute we are going to see 3 goals kicked and Bulldogs, pull off a victory. And then Bontempelli gets a clearance or tries to go for a clearance late, fumbles the ball, gets held up, and it was game over. But Carlton looked inspired. They looked a different team. And if there's anything to take out of this game, I truly question this. And if there are any Carlton supporters watching, or even if you're not a Carlton supporter but you've got opinions, feel free to share them. But at the end of this game, I found myself sitting there and questioning whether or not the Carlton players just got to a point where they weren't believing in Michael Voss anymore. And the fact that he's gone and a new coach is in, they found a new level of motivation and inspiration. Now, Carlton haven't been without efforts over the last few weeks while Michael Voss was still head coach, do not get me wrong. But this just felt different. There was just something different about it. Obviously, Fraser comes in, names a debutant straight off the rip. Let's play Jack Eisen. And Jack Eisen, if we were to rattle off Carlton's best players on the day, Jack Eisen would comfortably fit in there. He had a huge debut. I thought he was great. And as long as they keep persisting with him, he is going to be great for this club. Seeing them win at the end and just the raw emotion coming from Jarvis Smith. He almost had tears in his eyes when that final siren went. This is a kid who is so dedicated to this club. It was just so good to watch. As a neutral supporter, I might have my preconceived notions against Carlton supporters. I've spoken about it in the past before, that my history with Carlton supporters in the past has not been a positive one. But coming from somebody who follows a team that is going through a rebuilding process, trying to find it hard to find wins, I know what it feels like. And, being in that transitional period, and Carlton were expected to deliver a lot more than what they have this year. But to see them just get up and about, notch up their second win for the season, but to see the players just find some belief within themselves was absolutely huge. But then again, as I said, it begs the question, where has this been? Where did this newfound motivation and drive come from? with Josh Fraser at the helm, I'm just keen to see how he continues to roll the dice, because in the VFL, they've got some kids that are playing decent football. Wade Dirksen played round 1 in defence. He's gone back to the VFL. He's been kicking goals as a forward. Harry Mackay could do with a chop out, and if Fraser wanted to really, take true control here and test Carlton's mettle, this is where some of the older players have the opportunity to be sat to the side and the young kids can come in and have a crack. I mean, Jack Ison just came out and proved with opportunity you can do some big things. Breaking down the match timeline, as I said, this was an arm wrestle for 3.5 quarters. At quarter time, the Bulldogs led 4-1-25 to 2-5-17. At halftime, a 10-point lead to the Bulldogs with 5-4-34 leading 3-6-24. At three-quarter time, an 8-point lead to the Bulldogs, 7-7-49 led 5-11-41. And then in the final term, Carlton just kicked away in a big way. 10-14-74 defeated 9-8-62. Could have been and should have been a much larger margin the way of Carlton, given some of the shots that they absolutely peppered. But boy, as I said, Carlton have shown glimpses in recent weeks, but this was the most comprehensive 4-quarter performance I've seen Carlton put in this year. And that's without counting the win that they had against Richmond, because I felt for the most part Richmond played a better game in that game. Carlton off rip, apart from that first quarter where Bulldogs got out early, Carlton played the better brand for 4 quarters. It was absolutely incredible to watch. Breaking down this game, this is probably the first game we have seen where outcome is reflected by statistical, outcome. 69 more disposals Carlton had around the ground. They had a lot more kicks, only 11 more handballs. Inside 50s, they absolutely dominated and should have won by a much bigger margin, given the fact that the Bulldogs managed to kick 62 points from 38 entries, 9-8 from 38, from 10-14, from 24 entries, or 24 scores, 55 inside 50s. Both teams inside 50 running at 43 and 42% respectively. It was rough shot. They were getting plenty of looks inside Carlton, and that's why I'm saying all of these inside 50s aren't reflective of the scoreboard. They had many entries that went in and came straight back out. They had many entries where they had opportunity to score and just missed, either out on the full or registering a behind. Bulldogs are lucky that they stayed in touch for as long as they did, because this could have gotten ugly in a big way. Hitouts not too big at all, 22-27 the way of the Bulldogs, which is quite surprising given that Rory Lobb was the main contributor in that ruck contest. But around the stoppages, Carlton were better, 36-27. Patrick Cripps led the way, especially in that last term where they ran away with it. He just went to a whole other level, and I've got preconceived notions about Cripps as well. If you ask my opinion, hot take, probably shouldn't be a 2-time Brownlow medalist, but started the year off and a lot of people were questioning him and his leadership, some even suggesting that he should be dropped. But this man put Carlton on his back in that last quarter to ensure that they got the win. I have nothing but respect for the guy after that performance. That was absolutely incredible. 140 to 109 contested possessions, 247 to 209 the way of uncontested. Bulldogs only turned the ball over 2 more times than Carlton did. The marking game, again, just slowing things down, maintaining possession, taking the sting out of the game, especially late when they had that lead. 124 marks to 90. Carlton only averaged 92 marks for the season, so they were well over their average, almost by 20 odd marks. And the Bulldogs only just over their average of an 87. Incredible. Incredible. And when you have a look at the player statistics and you break it down, Marcus Bontempelli was absolutely shut down in this game. Like, he had 24 touches and kicked a goal, but he just wasn't his usual Bont self. His efficiency with ball in hand was rather terrible, if you ask me, just turning the ball over and doing some non-Bontempelli-like things. Oliver Florent played his best game for Carlton for the season. Patrick Cripps, as I said, led the way by example. Matthew Carroll a young kid who's getting opportunity, 16 disposals and kicks 3 goals. Jaga Smith has a serviceable game. Will Hayward, Lockie Cowan, Oliver Hollands, Billy Wilson made a name for himself, and a lot of people saying that he's going to be a great thing to watch. The only player that, well, I was going to say the only player that I felt didn't have much influence was Sam Walsh, but he had 25 touches and laid a couple of tackles as well. So, but they didn't rely on Sam Walsh as they had to have had in the past. It was a comprehensive all-round win here for Carlton. And when you name players like Carroll, Smith, Cowan, Hollands, Wilson, Walsh, Ison, all these young names that are getting opportunity and all standing tall, absolutely incredible. For the Dogs, I don't know. It's really rough shot for them. If they get their players back from injury, I have no doubt in my mind that they turn things around. But I mean, in this game as well, Bailey Williams goes down with a hamstring injury. I don't know the severity of that yet, but Bailey Williams might not be an A-list talent, but he has such a serviceable role that he plays each and every week at this club, and taking another player out forces reconfiguration again. So I don't hold it against the Bulldogs. Again, coming from a Richmond point of view where we've been absolutely slaughtered by injury this year, I can understand not having your best available due to that fact. But no English, no Darcy, no Liberatore, missing other players and having to move pieces around definitely impacts you as a club. I just don't know whether the Bulldogs can get back to a level where they can find some continuity with all these players out. If they can get them back and start getting that circulation going, maybe we've got something here. As for Carlton, can they continue to be inspired? Can they continue to drive this motivation? They're no write-off at this point in time, 10 rounds in, that if they can get a good run going home, they could finish 10th. I mean, let's have a little quick look on the fly. We'll have a look when the ladder comes up, but at the moment, they've won their 2 games. They're only 3 wins behind 10th place, which is the Bulldogs. So if the Bulldogs or St Kilda or Collingwood, North Melbourne, GWS, these teams that are above them continue to lose and Carlton can build momentum, could they have a monumental shift in turning their year around, finishing 10th and potentially having a finals berth? We've seen some crazier shit happen. The first of 3 on Sunday was at the MCG, Essendon hosting Fremantle, and this has created some talking points. What can we take away and what did we learn from this game? We learned that Fremantle is still very comfortably going to be a top 4 team this year and a premiership contender for the first time in a long time. We know they've gotten to a grand final in the past and got absolutely dog walked, and there's many different times that I've spoken about Fremantle and said that on paper they have one of the most comprehensive lists in the competition. This is the season that we are finally starting to see that all come together. Unfortunately, this was a win that came up against Essendon and has a lot of people talking. Again, not just supporters, but the media. And the media have been absolutely dragging Essendon for days. And as unfortunate as it sounds, I think the dragging is well deserved. Do not get me wrong, there are some injuries to some key players that would make a genuine impact in this team. Probably no bigger than Nick Martin if we're being serious. But to have Brad Scott as head coach and just some of the arrogance that he exudes with the answers he gives to the journalists, I don't think he's the guy. I'm very close friends. One of my very close friends is a Essendon supporter, and he has been calling for Brad Scott's head for a long time now. And I just don't see him being the man to take this club into the future. Now, Essendon's next 3, he's been posed the question already. If Essendon lose to Richmond, West Coast, and Carlton out of their next 3 games, where does that leave Essendon as a club and Brad Scott as a coach? Because surely you don't keep your job if you drop all 3 of those games. And at the moment, with the way Essendon has been playing, it is very plausible that they could drop all 3 of those games. Now, Brad Scott's come out and made the comment, but what if we win all 3? What's the conversation then? Now, the conversation would be, good, you've won 3 games of football, right? About fucking time. But this matchup against Fremantle had the worst turnout by fans by number in the stadium that Essendon has seen in 35 years. And a big bulk of those supporters walked out at halftime. It's not boding well for Essendon. This is, it's not good at all. We're seeing players in form slumps. We're seeing fans just desperate for effort and not getting it. And the game was over at quarter time. You just had to question how big of a margin Fremantle was going to win by. And the effort in that first half, or even for 3 quarters, was non-existent. At quarter time, Fremantle led 5-4-34 to 1-3-9. At halftime, 10-6-66 led 1-8-14. 3-quarter time, 13-6-84 led 3-12-30, and the final scoreline, 16-8-104, defeated 8-13-61. 1 goal 8 in a half of football. They then, in the next quarter, kicked 2 goals 4, and then in the final term, they managed to kick 5 goals 1. But by that point, the game was over and done, and was junk change goals. It was junk time, junk change, whatever you want to refer to it. Game was dead. Any goals that are kicked in that kind of end game when there's that big of a margin is just a consolation prize to stem the flow a little bit. It's not even a moral win in the way of outscoring them in the final term. It was bad. It's getting bad. And I personally think, with Peter Wright going down with injury out of this game and missing the Dreamtime, I'll be tipping Richmond to defeat Essendon at the Dreamtime game. Not just because I'm a Richmond fan, but I've seen enough out of Richmond over the last couple of weeks to firmly believe we can beat Essendon. We saw how West Coast played this past week, gone against GWS. There is no discounting them against Essendon. And with a newfound motivation and inspiration at Carlton, nothing stopping them from beating Essendon either. So I guess in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be sitting back and having a conversation, because Brad Scott, even though the CEO has come out and said he's our next man, he's going to take us to our next premiership, I don't think it's going to be the case in 3 weeks. Whereas for Fremantle, we can't speak any higher of these guys. Earlier in the video, I said that the transition game of Sydney was the best in the comp. Fremantle, at this point in time, is the only team that has a transition game that I feel is close enough to what Sydney is doing. And they look very Sydney-like when they transition that ball from defensive line to forward line. I very much, even though at the start of the year I predicted a Brisbane three-peat, Sydney and Fremantle at this point in time are the 2 best teams in the comp. The way they handle the ball, the way their players are utilised and they each play their role. We could see this year what I've been calling for the last couple of weeks, the Matthew Pavlich Cup. Pavlich, obviously a legend of the Fremantle Football Club, now CEO over at Sydney. So, you know, where would his allegiances lie? Do we get a grand final where we see Sydney versus Fremantle, and Pavlich either side of it would be a happy man? He'd be happy to see a club that he bled for win a premiership, but he'd be even happier to see, you know, a club that he is helping the running of on a day-to-day basis get up and win as well. It's very great to think of, and I definitely think, as a neutral supporter, seeing Sydney and Fremantle go head-to-head in a grand final with the game plays that they install and the way they operate, 2 similar styles going head-to-head would be a great watch. Boy, I get excited just thinking about it. I might have to have 5 minutes later on just to make sure you know what I'm saying. But breaking down the team stats, as comprehensive a win as this was, I think this is one of those cases where it's pretty blown out, right? You would think that. But it was not the case, because Fremantle only had 34 more disposals for the game. 384 leading 350. They had only 5 more inside 50s. 52 to 47. Around the ground, they were only 2% better with efficiency, 76% leading 74. Inside 50, they ran at 50%, which was only 6% more, or less than 60% of a 44.7 from Essendon. Hitouts only went the way of Fremantle marginally, 35 to 28. Essendon actually won the clearances, 33 to 29. The marking game, you'd think, well, Fremantle must have had plenty more marks. 9 more, 88 leading 79. This is a game where even tackles, 64 to 65, the way of Fremantle. This is a game statistically where you look at it, if you didn't see the score, you would think, well, Essendon must have been really competitive from start to finish here, but the score line dictates something completely different. Now, of all these behinds they kicked, obviously they convert 5 of those. They score 91 instead of 61, and it's a much more reputable score. And a lot of people can sit back in isolation and probably say, well, if they had kicked straight, they would have won. But hey, if my auntie had a penis, she'd be my uncle. You know what I'm saying? So in hindsight, we can sit back all we want and say that stuff. But Fremantle, just the way they handled this game from start to finish, I think it took them less than 20 seconds in the start of this game for Bolton to slot one from outside 50. That's just how quick they pounced on this game. This is how dead in the water they already were from the get-go. And whenever Essendon would manage to finally kick a score of some description, Fremantle would kick another couple and just stem the flow. It's rough shot again. I'm taking shots as a Richmond supporter, and a lot of people might come and check these videos out and think I'm a fucking idiot because I should be focusing more on my team and our woes and injuries and everything else to be taking pot shots at other clubs. But this is coming from somebody who has seen, you know, we're going through it. Richmond have won fuck all games over the last couple of years, so I know what it feels like, and I know, but we still have people rocking up to watch our games. We still have young kids putting in effort. That's, I think, what separates West Coast and Richmond and maybe North Melbourne in part from Essendon right now. The effort is a little bit few and far between. Zach Merritt can't do everything on his own. Roberts has so much talent in the world, Archie Roberts. I feel being used as a midfielder would capitalise on that, but kicking the ball backwards, sideways, and racking up 30 a week isn't doing anything to better Essendon as a team. You'd rather see him have 20, 25 disposals and most of those balls that go forward half and get scores from them instead of just chipping it around, handballing it around. I don't know. I just think very much so Carlton identified it. They got to a point where they said Voss isn't our man anymore. They moved on, and have a look already. Maybe it's time for Essendon to do the same. Speaking of Richmond, the next game was down at Marvel Stadium, St Kilda hosting Richmond, and I actually thought Richmond were half a chance in this game. I didn't realise Callum Wilkie was going to get up and play with that back injury he suffered 2 weeks ago, but with no Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira to run shot through that midfield, I honestly thought Richmond could have a crack. And even though Richmond didn't get the win here, falling by 36 points, I think is another one of those games where the scoreboard doesn't reflect the effort, because I truly, at this point in time, with where Richmond is at with our list, commend Richmond on a 4-quarter effort. And some people might sit there and say, well, you lost by 6 goals. How's that a good effort? This could have been a big blowout, and should have been, given the inaccuracy by St Kilda. And normally when that happens, Richmond lay down and the opposition just run all over the top of them. But Richmond found a way to dig deep. The pressure game was great from Richmond in parts. Our transitional game with handball over the last couple of weeks, when it works, has been absolutely great. And we need to remember, while a lot of people are dogpiling on Adamuze saying he's not the man for the job, very hard for a team to find any continuity when you've got 19 injuries, 25 available players coming into this game. We lose Campbell Gray to a hamstring early, drops us now down to 24 available players. Another player out, one less rotation on the bench, again, back-to-back weeks where that's happened, and we still were able to dig deep enough and stay in the contest for long periods. St Kilda had some parts of the game where they started to jump away. Richmond would stem the flow and get back into it again, and as a Richmond supporter, that is all I want to see. Winning is great, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not something that I am expecting each and every week. We just want effort. We want to see some drive. We want to see the young kids getting game time, but we want to see some fight. We don't want to see players laying down. And that's what Richmond gave in this game, which is the takeaway for me as far as, you know, what did we learn from round 10? We learned that even though Richmond's backs are truly against the wall, they can show a lot of fight. And these young kids that are getting experience are truly going to be held in better stead for it down the line, because they've had opportunity early, and once they get 50 games under their belt, they are going to be incredible. There's still plenty of players on the field that are young that haven't played, you know, so many games. We managed Mike Lafau, for example, who at this point in time is currently talking about an extension at the club. He's only played 19 games. Jonty Falls only played 24. Sam Lawler, for example, and Taj Houghton, drafted in the same draft. 33 games have been played since then, and they are yet to play a game with each other. Josh Smiley still out injured. All of these kids are going to be so great, and I'm so excited as a Richmond fan to see these kids get game time and grow and just see how they fit into the system. What we learn about St Kilda, I feel anyway, is all the attention so far. What we learned from round 10 in relation to St Kilda is, I feel we've been paying attention to the wrong players. All the rhetoric has been pointed at Tom De Koning, Jack Silvani, Liam Ryan, all these players that they traded for to get in, Sam Flanders. But the youth that they have that are starting to step up are where we should be directing our attention to, because they've got some young kids that have been taking the bull by the horns and running it into the ground, which we will talk about momentarily. Looking at the match timeline, at quarter time, St Kilda led 5-3-33 to 2 goals straight 12. At 3-quarter time, 10-5-65 led 6-3-39. 3-quarter time, 13-9-87 led 8-6-54. And the final scoreline, 16-13, 109, defeated 11-7, 73. Still finding ways to kick 11 goals, I think, to me, is great. Richmond are still digging deep and hunting and just staying in the game. They were great for 3 quarters against Adelaide before a little bit of a blowout in that 3rd quarter ran away with it. St Kilda did the same thing here. This is probably the first game over the course of the weekend where the stats were one-sided, and deservingly so. St Kilda had 408 disposals, leading Richmond's 327. Inside 50s, 63 for St Kilda, 37 for Richmond, so not bad return considering we didn't have much of it. Richmond actually ran at a better disposal efficiency around the ground, 77.7%, leading St Kilda's 75. Inside 50 efficiency, 55.6 for St Kilda, 48.6% for Richmond, both up on their season averages. Again, as far as adjudication goes, 5 more free kicks away of St Kilda wouldn't have changed anything. The stoppage game, again, St Kilda dominance, 42 hitouts to 19, 41 clearances to 27. So when you see this much of a disparity, 36 points the way of St Kilda is actually not too bad, considering, statistically speaking here, this should have been an absolute smacking. So to still fall within that 6-goal range, I think Richmond fans like myself should be incredibly happy. Now again, this is a game where you look at the scoreline and you say, well, they kicked 13 behinds. They kicked straighter, it would have been a bigger margin. But again, hindsight. Around the ground, 115 marks to 103, both well up on averages. And tackles, 50 to 40. So again, just even keel around that. But just center clearance, dominance. Stoppage clearance, 24 to 16, the way of St Kilda. 17 to 11, the way of center clearance. They just had more of it. They used plenty of it, and particular players just standing tall. As I said, you're not looking at these players that they have actively traded for. It's these kids that are taking a next step in their game. Max Hall was huge. Hugo Garcia, I thought, was best on ground. Jack Carroll played incredibly well. Darcy Wilson, Marcus Windhager, Mateus Philippou, Charlie Banfield on debut looked good. The young kids just stepping up, and when attention is looking at all these players that they've actively traded for, and you question, or Tom De Koning hasn't been all that too good in the ruck. He's slowly finding his place. Jack Silvani in the back line, slowly finding his place. But you're looking at the wrong players. The players that St Kilda already had that haven't been truly getting these opportunities have now started to step up into these newfound roles. I mean, Max Hall has 26 disposals and has some of the most score involvements in the game. Hugo Garcia, 25 disposals, 10 clearances. Absolutely ran roughshod all over Richmond's midfield. These are players that are going to hold St Kilda in better stead moving forward. Now, don't get me wrong, the players that they've traded for obviously are immediately bulking up that list. And if they can acquire some more talent on the outside, then yeah, maybe, sure. But these young kids, once they start growing into their own, these kids are the ones that are going to drive St Kilda's future, and they look incredible. Like, I can sit here and talk about how excited I am, you know, as a Richmond fan to see our young kids come through. But Garcia, Hall, Carroll, Wilson, Windhager, all of these players getting opportunity and running with it. As a St Kilda fan, I feel you'd have the same sentiment that I do as a Richmond fan. They looked incredible. I'm walking away from this game holding my head held high. I'm not at all concerned, and that's not arrogance or ignorance. I am actually very happy with how Richmond played out 4 quarters of football, and that gives me enough hope to think Richmond can pick up another win at the back end of this year. We do play West Coast again. We play Essendon this week. We do play Carlton again. And there is room for always at least 1 or 2 games where Richmond just play out of their skin and upset someone. I thought potentially that could have been Adelaide 2 weeks ago, foolishly, but I did tip Adelaide. I did tip Richmond in this game, foolishly, maybe, but we hung around in the contest. We hunted, and that's all I want to see. Both teams, I think, walk away with this very happy for many different reasons. The final game of the round just continued some of the upsets we've seen, with West Coast hosting GWS over at Optus Stadium in one of the biggest pressure games I have seen West Coast put on in recent years, and they walk away with a 17-point win against the Giants. I see performances like this and I question why there are 2 different West Coasts that we get each and every week. We get a game like this where the pressure rating for West Coast at one point in time was over 220, which is absolutely huge. But then we see other weeks where they get absolutely belted off the park. And it's kind of like a line ball. Well, what team are we going to get? This is a team that can cause upset. This is a team that has potential now with this wild card introduced to fall into that wild card configuration. This is a team that can upset your year, and they did so to the Giants in an emphatic way. And for the first time in a very long time, I watched a Giants outfit scared and fumble and turn the ball over and not able to get first hand to the ball. This was very uncharacteristic of GWS. This was, again, comprehensive is a word I've used a lot in today's video. This was a comprehensive beatdown. This was inspired. This was a digging deep into the gall, into the depths of West Coast and just finding something within, and they deserved this win from start to finish. Now, what did we learn about this? We learnt that GWS might be a little bit too Jesse Hogan centric forward of the ball, maybe. No Jesse Hogan and having to rely on a Cadman. Maybe Cadman's not ready for that step yet. We've learnt that maybe Lockie Ash is better suited as a defender, not a midfielder. Maybe it's just some magnet moving for Giants that clicks. What did we learn about the Eagles? Their young kids are much better suited than what people have been given credit for. And I still feel they might still be within that rebuild like they have been for the last 5 years. And that's not a meme at this point. That some people might find that very questionable and upsetting, that they've been rebuilding for this period of time and haven't really seen reward for effort. But when you look at the young kids these guys have, you can now see a very viable future, I feel, for the very first time with West Coast. Harley Reid plays his best game for the club that I've ever seen him play. So much so that I feel he was best on ground. You had some players that you wouldn't expect to really step up, like Bailey Williams in the ruck. Absolutely dominant against GWS. Lindsay in defence has been a revelation in his first year for West Coast. Milan Murdoch goes and plays a tagging role on Whitfield and kind of takes Whitfield's influence a little bit out of the game. A little bit kind of upsetting the fact that Murdoch gave away 150 metres worth of penalties away for some sheer stupidity, but he played a role. It might not be a role that he's used to playing, but he played it. So, again, they just did not have answers for what West Coast started firing in a game that saw the momentum shift so much. In the first quarter, GWS led 2-6-18 to 1-2-8. At halftime, West Coast led 7-4-46 to 4-8-32. Momentum was then wrestled all the way back by GWS, and at three-quarter time, 9-10-64 led 9-6-60. And then we just saw GWS kick a couple of goals and maintain that momentum, but then West Coast kicked a goal, kicked another goal, kicked another goal, and there were no answers. GWS were just left in this state of bewilderment, and the final score, 13-10-88, defeating 10-11-71. Fumbled handballs. Again, very similar to what we saw with Hawthorn against Melbourne. Fumbling handballs, not making kicks, getting caught holding the ball. The pressure that West Coast applied, I feel, at least over the last couple of years, was the most amount of pressure I've seen West Coast ever put on. And they showcased to the AFL world what they are capable of at their best. The only issue is their best, their worst. The gap in between, too insurmountable, I feel anyway, just as a neutral supporter. But this was great. I absolutely loved it. Breaking down the team statistics for this game, I'm still in bewilderment that they won as convincingly as they did. It was just so good. I mean, and when you look at the statistical breakdown, GWS had more disposals, 355 to 324. West Coast had 5 more inside 50s, 50 to 45. West Coast were just way more efficient with the ball, 74.7%. GWS normally run at a 73% efficiency. In this particular game, they ran at 65.4, almost a 10% drop. Inside 50 efficiency, West Coast normally fire at 48%. In this game, they ran at 62%. GWS were up on their percentage as well, 48% their average, up on 51. This is where there has been a little bit of controversy spoken about, and I'm not at all suggesting the adjudication of this game ruined it, because, as I said, Milan Murdoch gave away a 100-metre penalty and then a 50-metre penalty late. GWS could have scored off of those and failed to do so. But the free kick count in this game was 36 paid. 26 of those 36 were paid to West Coast. 26 to 10. That is as big a disparagement in free kick count that I have seen in a very long time. We saw earlier in this game, as I said, there was a 10 free kick difference between Sydney and Collingwood, for example. But I don't ever remember there being 16 free kicks more in a while. And if there has been, and it's flown over my head, I apologize. But yeah, the adjudication, there's been some questions about. I'm not one of those people, but when there's 16 more free kicks paid, depending on where they're paid, I mean, a lot of people are trying to suggest all the free kicks GWS got were in front of goal. I would have to go back and rewatch the game because I don't think that was the case. But the adjudication could be questioned if you choose to walk down that path. I'm not doing so. Following up, the hitouts. This is where I said Bailey Williams popped off. 50 hitouts for West Coast against GWS's 35. West Coast have only been averaging 29 hitouts a game. They almost doubled that in this game. Absolutely incredible. Clearances only went 2 the way of Giants, 39 to 37. Turnovers. West Coast actually turned the ball over more. Marks. Eagles just, again, defensively, they just continued to transition that ball and find spots. 89 marks to 57. Tackles, 82 to 78. So around the clinches, the pressure was tight and they matched it. But I mean, you've got a club here who averages 56 tackles a game, and Eagles laid 82. Again, just up on their numbers. This was big. This was huge. They've only been averaging 48 inside 50s. They get more than that. They're up on their disposal efficiency. They're up on their inside 50 efficiency. They're up on their hitouts. They're up on their clearances. They're up on their contested possession. They're just under their uncontested possession. They're down on their turnovers. This was as West Coast coded as a game you will find. And when you break down again, top contributors outside of Clayton Oliver, Harvey Thomas, and Lockie Ash, it's West Coast. It's Williams, Reed, Kelly, Duggan, Lindsay, Yo, Baker, Dersma, Young, Jinby, Waterman, Milan Murdoch, Hamish Davis. Boy, oh boy. I remember watching the doco where Adam Kingsley is shown absolutely ripping into GWS at a halftime break. I would have hated to be in the Giants' room, not only at halftime during this game, but after the game having lost. Because Adam Kingsley would have more than stripped paint off those Wolves. He would have fucking shredded them off with his teeth and spat it back out at those boys. He would have been filthy, and you could see it written all over his face in the coach's box. All credit to where it's due. A lot of people wrote West Coast off, and they've won some games this year that not many people would have expected. This probably the more reputable of the wins. We've seen them defeat Port, we've seen them defeat North Melbourne, but to defeat the Giants, who are considered by many to be a finals contending team, incredibly huge. We just need to see some continuity out of their game. We know Giants eventually will bounce back, but not having the year that many thought they would have. Could they potentially be a team that many would have expected to play finals, at least wildcarding, finish as a bottom 5 club? Because they're not far off it. With all the games discussed, we now turn attention to the AFL ladder, and this is where your team is situated after 10 rounds of football. Sydney currently sit in first place on 36 points, tied with Fremantle, who is currently sitting in second. In third place on 28 points, we have Geelong, who is tied with the Gold Coast in fourth and Melbourne in fifth. Hawthorn sit in sixth place on 26 points, and that finishes our top 6 all locked in for finals action. Turning our attention to the wildcarders. In 7th place on 24 points, we have Brisbane, tied with Adelaide, who sit in 8th place. In 9th place, we have St Kilda on 20 points, tied with the Bulldogs, who are in 10th place. We then have Collingwood in 11th on 18 points. North Melbourne is in 12th with 16 points, tied with GWS, who is sitting 13th. Port Adelaide sitting in 14th on 12 points, tied with West Coast, who are sitting in 15th. Carlton are in 16th with 8 points. Essendon sitting in 17th with 4 points, with Richmond in 18th place, tied with Essendon on 4 points as well. We've spoken about the games. I've shown you the AFL ladder. This is where the more personable things go down. My votes for the MVP award for round 10, as well as my team of the week for round 10. Now, normally, in previous installations of this video series, I would speak about a game and end that match talking about who I thought was best on ground, 3-2-1 Brownlow vote style. Speaking about some, specific stats that I think led to them being best on, like contested possessions and disposals, goals, score assists, things of that nature. We're going to go more Brownlow style here in the way of just announcing who got 3-2-1, but on screen I'm going to show you the stats that I decided were more definitive. So feel free to have a little bit of a read as that goes down. Just a little bit more flow, something a little bit different. I'm testing the waters fully, but we're kicking things off with Brisbane versus Geelong. I gave 1 vote to Tom Stewart, who I thought defensively just got back into his groove again. This was someone they direly and desperately missed in the grand final, and truly asserted himself in this game. I gave the 2 votes to Bailey Smith, having an absolutely sensational year. Should be in All-Australian contention, and will be well and truly in Brownlow contention as well. And best on ground for me was Sean Manor. The joke with him obviously being as a mature age recruit, he won the competition's Best Young Player award last year. I still think that's a huge meme in its own right. But this guy, to have 30 disposals, 14 score involvements, kick 5 goals, it was one of the best games I've seen him play as a Geelong player. And just his ability to, even when he's not having 30, he could have 15 touches, but 10 of those are score involvements, or in some way he's bringing someone into the game. He is very critical to the forward half of Geelong, and I feel his role within that team is criminally understated. Sydney versus Collingwood. I gave 1 vote to Isaac Heaney. Just in that midfield, his breakaway game, his ability to score, he had a monster amount of clearances. He was just on absolute fire, and he reaped reward to Brodie Grundy's efforts in the ruck. Tapping it down his throat, giving it to him each and every way he wanted it. Isaac Heaney is an absolute star. I gave the 2 vote to Nick Blakey, and I spoke about him earlier being a barometer for Sydney. Running off of halfback, having 39 disposals, getting involved with 4 score involvements as a defender is great, because you know he's getting those disposals, he's getting the ball forward half. He's never taking those cheap backwards or sideways kicks, and if he does, it's only to shift the ball. He's not doing it continuously. You always see him forward driving, and that's what I love about him. Best on ground to me, 3 votes, Brodie Grundy. Probably attributed to the fact that he didn't have a genuine ruckman to ruck against for a portion of that game, but he was huge. 34 disposals, 24 of those were contested, 6 score involvements, 46 hitouts, 12 clearances. Monster game by Mr. Grundy. Gold Coast versus Port Adelaide. I gave 1 vote to John Noble. Again, I feel he could be a sneaky chance for All-Australian contention this year, and I feel not many people are talking about him. Now, while he gets big numbers and a lot of those are uncontested, his work out of that defensive line for Gold Coast sets up so much, and while he might not get a huge amount of score involvements every week, he might only lay a couple of tackles here and there. He had 31 disposals and 7 score involvements out of that defensive line. He gains almost 700 metres. He has a couple of direct goal assists. He kicks a goal himself. Incredible game by him. The 2 vote I gave to Zach Butters, who I feel Port Adelaide wouldn't have even gotten nearly as close to the Gold Coast if it wasn't for his efforts in this game. 35 disposals, 5 tackles, 9 clearances, 8 score involvements. Just Butters doing Butters things. And best on ground, I gave to Noah Anderson, who has had a really slow start to the year. And as I pointed out when we spoke about the game, the fact that we've got a very potent midfield, you'd expect bigger numbers like this each and every week, but 33 disposals, 8 clearances, 5 score involvements, 4 tackles, almost 1,000 metres gained. Pivotal in this game for the Gold Coast. Adelaide versus North Melbourne. Obviously, with as big of a drubbing as it was, 3 votes going the way to the Crows. The 1 vote I'm giving to Jake Saligo, who's been on the outside this year, comes in and really got quality for quantity. From his 18 disposals, 11 of those were score involvements. And I think, again, when we speak about a Sean Manor, you can't put a price on a player that is as effective on a game as Saligo was here against North Melbourne. 2 votes I gave to Isaac Rankin, 8 score involvements from 28 disposals, 10 clearances to his name as well, really starting to play himself into some form. But I thought best on was Jordan Dawson. I just felt the way he used the ball around the ground was incredibly clever. 24 of disposals, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 9 score involvements. Just really finding his feet again after a rough couple of weeks just on a personal level. He's incredible to watch. Just his leadership and his ability to drive his team, absolutely sensational. Melbourne versus Hawthorn. I landed on Jack Steele for the 1 vote. 26 disposals, 7 score involvements, 6 clearances. Don't understand why St Kilda got rid of him as happily as they did, because I definitely feel with him in their midfield right now, the amount of tackle pressure, implied or physical, that he could be putting on and allowing a Max Hall and a Garcia to run a little bit more roughshod around that contest would be great, but he's been a great pickup for Melbourne. The 2 vote I gave to Dylan Moore, Hawthorn's best, and even though comprehensively beaten Hawthorn, Dylan Moore's game was huge. 27 disposals, 10 score involvements, 3 direct goal assists, 2 goals himself. Great effort in a night that was completely overshadowed by Melbourne. The best on ground mantle for this game I'm giving to Tom Sparrow. I think he really showed what he's truly capable of in this game. 27 disposals, 8 clearances, 8 score involvements. He was just up and about. Everything he touched just in some way turned to gold, and one of those players that is spoken about are potentially being traded or at least floated around as potentially moving at the end of the year. So keep your eyes out for that. Carlton versus the Bulldogs. I gave 1 vote to Matt Carroll. Again, 16 disposals, 6 score involvements, 3 goals. I think he played his role incredibly well, and to just pop up and kick the goals like he was kicking, can't look past him. The 2 vote I gave to Oliver Florent, off of half-back, best game for Carlton, and arguably the best game I've seen him play in a very long time. Managing 11 marks, 4 score involvements, and 28 disposals. Patrick Cripps best on. I'd said it during the discussion about this game. He just put them on his back. 29 disposals, 8 clearances, 2 goals, 7 score involvements, 5 tackles. If I didn't say 5 tackles already, he was just in and under everything and just giving his teammates first opportunity each and every time. Essendon versus Fremantle, I gave 1 vote to Patrick Voss. At one point, he hadn't kicked any goals yet, and my dad turned to me and goes, this is a game where he can stand up and kick 4. He kicked 5 from his 12, 8 score involvements as well, so can't look past his forward half efforts. The 2 vote I gave to Shea Bolton seems to be in conversation each and every week amongst Fremantle's best. 8 score involvements from 24 disposals, 3 clearances, 2 tackles, and 2 goals to his own name. And best on ground for me was Murphy Reid. He's sensational, this kid. I'm a little bit filthy that Richmond were in a position to draft him but didn't, and just what he could be doing for us right now would have a lot of Richmond supporters salivating. But he had 30 disposals, 7 score involvements, the 1 goal himself. He's just Mr. Involvement. Just get the ball into his hands and he's going to bring you into the game each and every time. St Kilda versus Richmond. I gave 1 vote to Max Hall. 10 score involvements, 7 clearances, 4 tackles, 26 disposals, 2 goals. Speaks for itself. 2 votes I gave to Jack Sinclair. Defensively, he's been absolutely solid for St Kilda this year, and should be, in my opinion anyway, within all Australian talks as well. He had 10 score involvements out of that defensive line with 29 disposals of his own. Best on ground I gave to Hugo Garcia. He had 9 score involvements from 25 disposals, 3 direct goal assists, 10 clearances, 7 tackles. He was an absolute beast in that midfield. Final game of the round, West Coast versus GWS. I gave 1 vote to Clayton Oliver. I thought he was GWS's best by far. 38 disposals, 5 score involvements, 7 tackles, 12 clearances. Couldn't fault his game. Bailey Williams from West Coast gets the 2 vote. 40 hitouts, 9 tackles, 7 clearances, 7 score involvements, and 2 goals of his own. And best on ground, Harley Reid. Honestly, the best game I've seen him play as an Eagle. 33 disposals, 10 score involvements, 8 tackles, 10 clearances, and 2 goals of his own as well. Absolutely huge. And with all those votes out of the way, this is how the leaderboard looks, with 5th place through to 1st place. In 5th, on 11 votes retrospectively, we have Christian Petrarca, Tristan Cherry, and Luke Jackson. In 4th place on 12 votes, we have Shea Bolton and Brodie Grundy. In 3rd place on 13 votes, we have Marcus Bontempelli and Isaac Heaney. In 2nd place on 14 votes, we have Nick Dacos and Harry Sheasel. And in 1st place, with a little bit of a gap on 18 votes, 4 votes ahead of the next best, we have Zach Butters and Bailey Smith. There is only one thing left to do before the round can be officially recapped, and that is to reveal my team of the week for round 10. So, this is how it turned out. In defence, I have John Noble and Jack Sinclair in the back pockets and Cal Wilkie at full back, with Nick Blakey and Oliver Florent on the half-back flanks and Tom Stewart at centre half-back. In the centre, I have Noah Anderson and Hugo Garcia on the wings, with Bailey Smith in the centre, with Brodie Grundy as ruck, Patrick Cripps at ruck rover, and Harley Reid at rover. Up forward, I have Max Hall and Tom Sparrow on the half-forward flanks, and Jake Waterman at centre half-forward, with Murphy Reid and Sean Manor in the forward pockets, and Patrick Voss at full forward. My interchange has Bailey Williams, Isaac Heaney, Shea Bolton, Jordan Dawson, and Isaac Rankin. The coach of the round goes to Andrew McQualter, and the assistant coach of the round goes to Stephen King. With all that, ladies and gentlemen, the round has officially been recapped. I do hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit that like button down below. Do leave a comment as well. Let me know how you thought the round played out, how your team went, what the configuration of this video feels like to you, if you like the change. If you don't, let's just talk about it. Always open to conversation, so let's drop some comments. Let's talk about it. And hit that notification bell before you leave. So if you want to get on board the community we are building, if you want to help grow this into something bigger, I would appreciate it if you did. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.